I hope that that will reveal to you that I am probably the only speaker who is privileged to address your group who does not, in fact, have an accent. Like most of you people here, my wife is an American citizen, and she constantly teases me about it doesn't matter how long I've lived in the States, 16 years in fact, we never as Britishers lose our accent. She reckons that to this day I still sound like Mrs. Thatcher in drag, you know. It's very humbling, believe me. In fact, I'm so pleased to be able to address you on your 50th anniversary that I wanted to say almost too much. First thing I wanted to say to you is that I do not view this for you, friends, as a 50th anniversary. I'd like you to view that as 5 perfect tens. Congratulations. My wife's a great reader, and knowing of my enthusiasm to share my ideas with nature, of nature with people, she thought I might go on too long. So just before I set out for my trip here, she'd found from her readings a quotation from the old English writer Charles Dickens that she thought might be relevant to this occasion. And this is what it says. I don't know whether I should read this to you or not. No man should speak for a greater duration than he can sustain the act of lovemaking. So in conclusion, let me tell you what I hope you've got from this presentation. First thing is, I want to suggest to you that in a huge conference such as this, facts are 10 a penny. With the new internet, all of the new communications resources, what really matters is to find some way of putting those facts into perspective, an organizing structure. That to me is the most valuable mindset you can bring to a convention. Second thing is, I hope at the end of my talk to have left you with some totally new ways of looking at food safety. And then finally, I want to answer the question that's in all of your minds. Why have they got a man from the National Geographic Society Animal Division to talk to us who are in the food service business? The world is full of changes, and I want to give you a new perspective of my own. It's my belief that since we're concerned about change, perhaps we biologists have a special offering that would benefit you. When you think about it, every animal and plant that is alive to this day is really the winner of 3.5 billion years of change. So what I want to do is to try and bring you some of the lessons from nature. Let me introduce you to the very first of these lessons. If I was to ask you what sort of animals and plants can teach us most probably you would say the world of the honeybee. There should be some sound to this sequence. But the truth is, ladies and gentlemen, I know full well that life for members of the American School Food Service Association is a hive of activity. And when you look closely with our high-speed cameras, you might be amused to find that nothing in life is perfect. You're not the only ones to find yourself banging your head against a wall. I'm going to use my animal sequences to allow you to make your own connections. But one of the things I'd suggest to you is this. Old facts seen from a fresh perspective here with the miracles of the high-speed camera provide new information. Oh, where's my chiropractor? These are slowed down 20 times. And it looks more like professional wrestling, doesn't it? Wait for it. Ooh. Even high flyers, after 50 years of unrivaled success, can come crashing to their knees unless you face the realities of the world about you. Fenokee Swamp in southern Georgia. an odd environment, dark, black, peaty water, the bottom of which has a foundation of peat that occasionally rises to the surface to produce new islands. Your lesson from this is that always life is changing. The only things that succeed are those things that match the realities of the world that exists at that time. So a fresh peat mountain coming from the bottom, only certain sorts of plants survive there. They change the reality of the world, and then different plants take over. And then they, in their turn, find that the area is altered once again. And so different specialists survive. A universal law of nature. We, me, your children, your society, can only survive if you face nature's universal law of matching the realities of the world we live in. The word Okefenokee really means, in the old American Indian, land of the trembling earth. And this is why. You could make the ground wobble 20 feet from where you stand. It's a floating island. Listen to the narration.
I actually enjoy walking on trembling earth, if I admit it. It's one of these strange experiences like walking on a bowl of jelly.
Yeah, my wife likes that too. You're never afraid of alligators, though Okefenokee is full of alligators, because there again, the reality, unlike the perception, is that alligators don't chase adult people. The few sad fatalities usually are much younger people, children, and of course dogs. I want to tell you another lesson that I gained from this sequence. I'm going to suggest to you that there's a universal law of life, that if situations change, you have to change to match them. And this swamp is so acid that the only plants that can survive both use trickery and twist the whole natural law upside down. These are plants that, in order to get the nitrogen that they need in their diet, have to trap insects to feed upon them. A tubular pitcher plant. The insects get lured over the lip, start to feed, and then when they try and escape, they found another coincidence of nature. Very, very, very often, nature is offering trickery. These are imitation trick windows in a plant. And the little insect struggles and bangs its way up one side until finally weakened, it'll drop down into that horn of death to be eaten for lunch by a plant. I want to suggest to you that most of us view nature as most romantic, peaceful, and beautiful. But through the eyes of a National Geographic Society photographer and an old Oxford biologist, I need to tell you that the truth of nature is that it is full of competition. Out in Fenokee Swamp, plants are trying to cover others with their leaves so they don't get enough food from the sunlight. Other plants are dropping chemicals around the roots of their competitors. How many of you have been into a pine forest and find how dank, quiet, and relatively sterile of other plants existing there? That's because the pines contain chemicals that they drop there. And seen again through the eyes of a botanist, every single plant is stuffed with chemicals that are there to protect it from the plant being eaten by fungi or insects or other sorts of organisms that would love to devour them. 5,000 to 10,000 chemicals exist in natural, healthy plants, and we eat a lot of them, that were put there initially for protection. Through all my studies over my 25 years making wildlife films, you find this clear law. The more competition there is in nature, although there are many strategies that different organisms use, the most striking one is to get more cooperation. And that is one of my secret key messages to share with you. You know, because the previous lady speaking, not your president, but the lady before, how important working together is. And I would tell you as a biologist, there's more and more need to do that. For example, rich products are supporting your organization to support me. Your organization has shared partnershiping relationships with other associations to grow. You're here to share and to grow. And my belief from looking at the world of nature is that whenever there are problems in our life, we will all begin to look more and more to ways to find partnerships and to grow together. Let me show you another lesson from nature that will reveal that to you. The most obvious example of partnerships is bees and flowers. But I thought this flower would have a different secret. We're in Jamaica, and the tubular flower is using hummingbirds to be its Federal Express service. If you like, what it's doing is giving its pollen upon the beak of the hummingbird in return for the partnership deal, which is getting nectar and pollen. And you can see in these pictures how the plant is specially modified with a long tube, and the little bits that project the male and female parts of the flower come down and touch the head of the beautiful hummingbirds. And if you want to know just how brilliant, how marvelous the world of nature is, just think how important it is for this red flower not to get its pollen taken by insects. That's why most hummingbird plants are bright red, a color that insects can't even see. So what you're seeing here is an incredible specialization of nature, so that the plant is advertising its services to hummingbirds that have color vision, but the insects don't recognize it. Whenever you look long-term at nature, you find sheer beauty to the human eyes. Whenever you're doing something that's perfect, that has integrity, even in our lives, too, in your daily life and mine, there is that same beauty of striving to do the best we can do, whatever the circumstances. Some of you may feel that you are never going to walk in a swamp with alligators. And yet I'm going to suggest to you that some of the problems that you're facing, financial problems, competition, you will feel, if not already, very much up to your armpits in alligators. Listen to my friend, Dr. Kent Vliet.
It is possible when you're in the lake that a big male will decide he doesn't want you there and actually come up and try to get you out of his territory. We've had very few problems when I was swimming in the lake, but there's always the potential for an alligator getting a hold of you and doing some real damage.
There's always the potential. I need to tell you that in life, nothing is completely risk-free. And what we perceive of as being a very risky venture, he has learnt so much about the challenge that he does this with total safety. I might not persuade you to actually go in the water and join him, perhaps. No, there's a lady nodding her head very clearly in front here.
That we needed to get off the boardwalks and go down and look at alligators at an alligator's eye level. Alligators communicate to each other visually by the way they hold their bodies out of the water. And we got down into the water to better understand how alligators are talking to each other in a visual sense.
We have found, not just as photographers, but also biologists, that to really understand the animals, you physically have to get to the same eye level or below. Do it when you take pictures of your children, your pets, or your family. You'll see how the pictures speak to you. In this case, my message for all of us is, how could possibly we make a career making wildlife films unless we could think the animal's thoughts, to be there at the right time? And for you, I'd suggest, as well as partnerships, it is crucial, as far as possible, to try and see the world ever more through the eyes of those who you work with, who you think might be a challenge to you. Any volunteers, ladies?
Aggressive animals. The way they tilt their heads, how high they hold their body out of the water are all indications if they're being aggressive or not. Not all the animals that come toward me are aggressive. Many are curious, but I still have to treat them all about the same. I can't let them get too close to me. I carry a large, about 5-foot long cypress pole with me, and if an animal does get too close, I just nudge it away and try to keep it out of strike range.
Yeah, right. Every animal survives because it, over a period of time, has come to suit the reality of the world it lives in. Even an alligator, with its eyes on stalks and its nose slightly raised, specially is enabled to hunt that much more stealthily. Little things don't mean a lot, as Harvey Mackay says. Little things mean everything. If you really want to know risk, look at this example where I was filming or being filmed next to an alligator nest, not realizing that the mother alligator was still close by. "10 foot long, mouth agape, hissing, protecting the young and the eggs within the nest." School food service, English rump steak. With a somewhat unwilling victim. When you get between an animal and her young, you know that that is a strong, strong passion of nature. And I would even take it further and say this: of all the lessons from nature that I can bring to you, while immediately accepting that we humans are not animals in the strictly carnal sense, we have morals and ethics and values quite different, yet nevertheless, the one thing that all animals show is how, if you were to ask them, they define success. For every animal and plant species, success is how well you set the next generation up to have a successful, long life of its own. In other words, looking after the next generation, after the children, and your care for that resonates with that. You think of alligators, perception again as being crude and harsh and vicious. And when first observed, people thought that the alligators were eating their babies like cannibals. Not so. In fact, of all of the reptile world, alligators are the best, most caring mothers. They literally hear the calls of their babies, dig them out from the nest, pick them up gently in their jaws, carry them slowly to the nearby water, dunk them to remove the shell, and then use their bodies like a floating island. They call them mum, the mum calls them back, protecting them from big turtles or fish below, or perhaps birds dropping down to feed on the youngsters. The strong lesson of life that perhaps we in all of the human society are beginning to forget is that success really does mean how well we look after the next generation. Universal throughout the animal world. I thought, thank you. From my knowledge of the School Food Service Association, one thing that I can uniquely bring to you that I hope you will find of benefit is a new way of looking at food scares and food risks. You all know how fashionable food can sometimes be. I know that we human beings aren't all that good at accurately perceiving how risky something is. In fact, my wife, who travels internationally, tore out an advertisement, a plaintive cry from an English newspaper, which really supported that fact. This is what it said: lost, black and white terrier, torn ear, broken tail, recently castrated. Answers to the name of Lucky. I work with the head office of the Environmental Protection Agency. They too were concerned that the public couldn't properly understand relative risks. And one of the things that I bring to you is a new way of looking at risks. Can you think of all the food scares, from Allah on apples to red meat, whether you're a vegetarian or not, to too much salt, too little salt? It's the molecule of the month, the worry of the week. How can you and I, who are not professionals and experts on risk assessment, how can we answer the principals and concerned parents who might want to get some input from you? I'm here to tell you that I have learnt that most of our generalizations about risk are based on perception and not on reality. I'd like to show you a first slide, which is, I made a Richter scale for risk that is so simple, I want to give it to each one of you. And it's like the Richter scale for earthquakes. If you think of earthquakes in California, you know, without knowing how it's worked out, that a 7 on the Richter scale probably means, sadly, that part of California is floating away. You don't know how it's worked out. There are bottom line numbers. And you have here 13 numbers, which is so simple that they look like a football field. And anyone can use this scale. You can take it home. Please do. There are handouts available for you at the back of the hall and at all the exits. And it's so simple that what I want to say is this. There is a secret that the media does not tell any of us. It is this. We now in our science departments have such sensitive detection equipment that we can detect 1 part in a quadrillionth of any toxin or poison or cancer-causing substance. That level of sensitivity is so amazing that we really can't take it into our heads unless you compare it to things we do know about. It is the same as being able to find 1 second in 32,000 years. It's the same as finding 1 banana in a line of bananas going from here to the moon and back 500,000 times. That is the message that I want you to take away, that yes, we should be worried when cancer-causing toxic substances are found by the scientists, but we do have to put them into perspective. We need to ask the media, don't just tell us that there's something found which in different circumstances, different quantities might affect us. The key question I would like you to ask them is, okay, we should be really concerned for our children and our families, but tell us to the best of your ability, how relatively risky is it for real people, real children in real circumstances? And this chart is so neutral, you can ask the press, you can ask Greenpeace, you can ask people that are in the industry, and anyone who views that they have an authentic account. Put their odds on +6, it'd be something like 1 in 1. I'm going to just go through for you. On the right, don't look at the points if you could avoid that for a minute. It goes 1 in 1, 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 10,000, 1 in 100,000. Where the point is 1 in a million, I call that effective zero. It isn't really zero, but what it means is that all the government regulatory bodies of food and the environment consider the odds so slight that it's not worth regulating compared with the bigger worries that are happening all around us. And so the next question I ask, as this slide shows, is what are the risks with which you and I are at home? On this neutral chart, you can see some amazing figures. There is no thing that's called risk-free. There's a 1 in a million chance that you might drown in your bathtub this year. Or you here on the ground might be killed by an airplane crashing through the ceiling, sadly. A mother dying of a single child, being struck by lightning, or accidents in the home on the year. Next slide shows that not only that, but foods fall in this category. The extra risk of cancer from 1 light beer a day for a year, or living in Denver where you're nearer the sun with more cosmic ray exposure. You go down the list until at the bottom you find the US FDA. There's a point where any risk below that isn't even regulated. Next, I became aware, next slide please, that there is on my simple chart a home-based zone. So before we get worried and panicked about the next risk, wouldn't it be an idea for us to have in our own minds that between 0 and +2 on this little chart that you're going to receive as you leave, that's really a risk with which we're at home. We don't change our lives radically around to avoid. Do they matter? Yes, but not when we're spending too much time on those and perhaps ignoring bigger risks to our children and to our society. And this is neutral. Anyone can put their own figures on it. Some people say to me, oh, Dr. Paling, I hear so many worries, I'm not even going to get up out of the bed in the mornings. Next slide shows you that perhaps you should. 300,000 people in America get carted off to the emergency room of our hospitals every year through accidents associated with their beds, mattresses, and pillows. Even people falling down toilets. Heaven knows how that might have started. There is no such thing as a risk-free lifestyle. And this topic is not mainly talking about risks, but I owe it to you to remind you what I said about competition and plants. We need to recognize that every healthy, organic plant is stuffed with chemicals to try and poison nature's predators. And therefore, when used with these very fine detection equipments, we can put the risks of pesticides upon this chart. And the next slide will show you that. Look on the far top right. The biggest risk, when you measure it with all of our chemical equipment, is natural chemicals, not artificial residues. The next category going down is spices and flavorings. Am I saying don't use them? No, no, no. I'm saying to you, we need to put it into perspective and recognize that when you've got these very delicate equipments, the health protection levels that are so sensitive, then you see that spices and flavorings actually get part of their appeal because of the strength of the chemicals that are within them. And then synthetic pesticides are much lower, the residues. Does it matter? Yes, it matters, but not at the expense of looking at those over other worries. And then we've got charred foods and fungi and hormones that are small risks too, in a relative way. Next slide, please. The Bobbitt Zone. One of my enduring messages for you is this: don't get too taken aback by following the worries of the papers. On the right, the average Joe zone is an area where things happen to the average person. 1 in 2, 5 in 100. You can see how far away, what a gulf there is between the worries of the newspapers and where you and I and our children live our real lives. Please, I have this slide as a cartooned takeaway for you. You need, I love you to recognize that there are worries, but they must be put into perspective. And it's not the little worries. The next slide will show you it's the big worries of the USA and British society we need to address. Big crime, drugs, violence worries. The next slide shows that children are so frequently wrapped up in, hurt by, crippled as a result of risks that are enormous in the odds compared to those of foods that we tend to exaggerate. Let me run through some for clarity. Children, 1 in 100 being abused, found guilty, parents found guilty. This is this country that we all live in. The bottom ones show you how our families are breaking up. I am divorced. I make no claim to be better than anyone else in this world. I'm showing the reality of it. The next slide and final slide shows you that the prison population in America is staggering. And as a lucky white man from Oxford, I recognize that it's nothing to do with the African American community. The reality is that 1 in 10 of all American males between the age of 20 and 29 are in prison in any one day. I'm trying to present you with a staggering reality, because to me, I want you to know that the most valuable thing you do is to give caring to children and feed children, because our society needs you, ladies and gentlemen, so desperately. In my little way, and I study this and write books about this, I've tried to instill from it the messages that there's no such thing as a risk-free life. Yes, we need to be concerned about risks of food. We need definitely to know the difference between the average Joe zone and the Bobbitt zone. But even more, we need to recognize that it's our society and its effect on children that is the most serious thing that I, in my 4 years of doing this work, have found to be the case. So life can be very depressing. In England, we have a wonderful saying, don't be pessimistic. You'll probably be wrong anyway. Let me show you the final lesson from nature. I want to let you think that we're going to go by that one to the next bit of video, if you please. I want you to feel that sometimes we who are making films feel just the same as you. Can we have the next bit of video, please? I know what it's like to feel totally helpless in trying to alter my career. Problems are too great, too overwhelming. Think of yourself, just for now, as this little shrimp over the forehead of a freshwater fish. This really is the emblem for the last part of my talk. It's a fish shrimp with suckers. It's about 1/4 of an inch. and it has to live in a very turbulent, risky world. It sits there on the nose of the perch, holding on for grim death. Remember I said that everything in life that survives has to have some way of matching the realities of the world it lives in? This little shrimp did not go to Jurassic Park. It's got hooks and spines and friction pads on its elbows, all so that it can hang on to the smooth surface of a fish if the fish tries to wriggle and remove it. It can swim, but in fast-moving waters it gets taken back until it finds a little eddy, where using its little body like a kite, the legs beating away for propulsion, it can swim freely through the fresh waters of North America. This is a 3-spiked stickleback fish, just ready for a school lunch. Because stickleback fish love little shrimps, and not surprisingly, you can see the two of them having a go at it and taking it out, and yet it somehow dropped down into the gravel unharmed. If you watch it, you might be astonished to find that it hangs on and then gets up again without seeming to recognize that it's in danger. And as a result, the little fish stalks it, takes it into its mouth time and time again, until it finally gets a strategy and decides to engulf it in one gigantic swallow. It's gone. Or has it? For there, inside the mouth of the tiny fish, a little fish shrimp, being true to its nature, hanging on for grim death. And there's not a lot that 1-inch long stickleback fish could do right in the back of its throat. I hope they train you in the Heimlich maneuver for fishes sometimes. We need that. But my lesson is that the little shrimp has what it takes to survive. There it is, bouncing away. Nature is incredible, giving us all what it takes to survive. But the stickleback does not have things its own way too. This is nature's living torpedo, a freshwater pike. The eyes actually have sight lines like a gun from the eye up to the nose. It doesn't wriggle its body to get closer to its prey, just ripples its top fins, moving closer and closer until it's within range, and only then will it flash its tail and engulf for school lunch the hapless stickleback fish. Wait for it. You must feel like this some days, as if everything's going wrong. Only when it's completely in position and one gigantic flick of the propulsive tail and a mouth wide open, and the stickleback will disappear forever. Or does it? For the stickleback has spines too. And you can see them in these amazing pictures. Nature is incredible. How everything that survives, including your 50-year-old proud association and me and your children, we have what it takes if we're true to our nature and trust it. I filmed this when I was a professor at Oxford nearly 20 years ago, and many times I thought, oh, the fish is gone this time. Give it half an hour and see the coughing and spluttering as the pike can't really turn it around so it can swallow it. And the most amazing sight of all, when you are feeling down in the dumps as if life is eating you up, remember this: inside the mouth of the pike is a stickleback. Inside the mouth of the stickleback is the little fish shrimp hanging on for grim death, bouncing away there. Hold on. So when you're feeling bad, please remember this. Nothing could be worse than this. Until the two creatures will turn around and spit and and then the little fish shrimp, sucker by sucker, moves to the very front of the little stickleback's mouth, and the two animals in between breaths separate and part company forever. You don't have spines, you don't have suckers, you don't have hooks, and yet I suggest to you Every one of us has what it takes to survive. Don't be over-impressed by the papers. Make them put the risks into perspective. Go for ever more partnerships, as competition undoubtedly will increase upon you as the next 50 years roll by. And if nothing else, remember, please, this. What you're doing, from my view, first as an environmentalist, then as a food risk researcher, but more important, someone that travels to many parts of the world, you're dealing with the most fragile part of American society, how we are dealing with our children so statistically unsuccessfully that we and they need you deeply. So please, for all of us, go out with renewed strength and vigor from this convention. Take all the lessons that you've learned, put them into perspective, and I hope that in the future you will enjoy seeing 50 years further up from one place or another the success of this great organization. I do thank you, and if you've enjoyed it, my wife would like you to know that we'd be glad to come again, and failing that, if you haven't enjoyed it, she said, my name is Margaret Thatcher. So thank you once more. I do thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope that's useful. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And thank your organizers, too. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful. Really, it's amazing, isn't it?